Good. How are you? Slide in here, man.
Good evening. Whoa, it's working really good. I'm Commissioner Greg Todd, Duchesne County. I'd like to welcome each of you here this evening. We expect a good crowd, and we've got a good crowd. So I'd just like to let everyone know the senator is here, and please launch the plan. Launch the plan. It's Barry. I've known him for years. He actually just sent out. He used to be at KSL. He was just left there to be with the senator, but he was also working back in DC years ago. So we'll turn the time over to him, and we'll allow him to introduce, and we'll get started. Thanks.
You're certainly not here to listen to me, so we're going to be very quick with my portion. In a moment, we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and then I'll welcome the Senator to the stage to share some remarks. And then as you have questions this evening, if you just put your hand up, we'll have staff moving throughout, and when it's your turn, we'll come to you with a microphone, share your thoughts and questions with the Senator, and we'll do that until the hour has expired, and then we'll say goodnight. So thank you all for being here, and ask you to stand, facing the Pledge of Allegiance, or facing the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now we'll turn the time over to the Senator, who's joining us from the rear here. And as I said, he shares some opening remarks. It's your turn to speak with him and ask any questions you might have. Put that hand up. We'll come with the microphone. So with that, Senator Mike Lee.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. I know that on a perfectly good Thursday evening, you've got a wide variety of options available to you. In fact, if you choose to come and spend some time with me, it's gratifying. We've got some serious things going on in our country. My heart's heavy. And any among you who are inclined to be prayerful, keep your thoughts and your prayers. The families of our servicemen and women tonight, with the other Americans, visa holders, and people who are trying to get out of harm's way. And it's nothing short of tragic. I've been here in the basement all day, started up with an early morning meeting in Duchesne. That's when I started getting the first details of what was unfolding in Afghanistan. We're still not sure exactly what has happened, why it happened this way. But over the last 2 weeks, we've seen a nightmare unfold in slow motion. You know, we've known for a long time that war would have to come to an end, as all wars do. We've known for a long time that we were promised it when President Obama promised it, didn't deliver. President Trump promised it and started to deliver. He actually made a lot of progress toward withdrawal, toward orderly withdrawal. I received regular classified briefings about how that was going, making progress toward it. And all of those plans were a few elements. Get all the American personnel out safely, American citizens out safely, all the people who would help us with translation out safely. Last but not least, we would destroy weapons we could not return home. This is national defense, national security 101. It doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or a socialist or a libertarian or whatever. You do not leave weapons in enemy territory. where those would be used by our enemies against us and against our allies. You don't do it. We never have been in the practice of doing that as Americans. Over the last 2 weeks, what has been surprising is not our withdrawal from Afghanistan. We've known for years that that would happen one day. We didn't know exactly what. What has been surprising is that, number one, we had a president who identified August 31st as the sacred day by which we had to leave. Earlier this year, he started saying it has to be by September 11th. Why he would want to commemorate acts of vile terrorism carried out on us 20 years ago is beyond my ability to understand. But set that aside for a minute. I lack the capacity to understand why he would remain wedded to the August 31st deadline, even if that meant we couldn't get our people out. Even if that meant we couldn't destroy or return our weapons to their point of origin. Rest assured, we're going to be finding out answers to all those questions in the coming weeks. I do not know why, and I cannot explain on what planet this would make sense. Now, look, getting out of Afghanistan was always going to be difficult. It was never going to be fraught with anything but peril. But it didn't have to end this particular way. I intend to find out what happened. Roosevelt, one of my best friends ever, grew up here. Jay Jorgensen is the son of John and Louise Jorgensen. Anybody know John and Louise? Yeah, good people. Jay and I met when we were freshmen at BYU. We ended up serving LDS missions together. We were companions for a few months. Went to law school and college at the same time. Ended up at the same law firm. And Jay always had great insights growing up on a cattle ranch in the outskirts of Roosevelt. What he referred to as Ioka, a suburb of Roosevelt. Our mission president sometimes infuriated him by calling the city Roosevelt. Jay said, that's not how you say it. He was always proud of where he came from, and where he came from has reason to be proud of him. He exemplifies the hard work, dedication, wisdom, and thirst for knowledge that is characteristic of people from this region. I've noticed in the Uinta Basin, you must enforce the no jerks rule pretty well, because I've never met a person from the Uinta Basin I don't like. I can't say the same of every neighborhood of Utah. So I'm grateful to be with you tonight and look forward to hearing your questions. Do my best to answer them, and what questions I can't answer, I'll try to figure out a way to answer tonight. So with that, Lee Lonsbury's got the microphone there. When you ask your question, tell me your name, and I'll do my best to answer.
I'm coming to you, man.
First of all, Senator Lee, thank you for coming to the little town of Roosevelt. A lot of people pass us by. I was the one that messaged you a while back, telling you what a trillion seconds means. Did your staff pass that information on to you?
A million seconds is 11 and a half days. A billion seconds is 37 years. A trillion seconds is 37,000 years.
Well,
that message?
32,000 years.
32,000, sorry, I got it. I was close.
I have been waiting for you when you go on Fox News at night and all these other programs to present that to the American public, because that is concrete. People know what a second is. And I figured it out today. If the Democrats pass their $5 trillion budget, if we were to pay $1 a second, it would take 1,160 generations to pay off that debt. We cannot become a debtor nation. Biden has already made us a fool in the eyes of the world. What can you do to prevent us from becoming a debtor nation?
Thank you. Remind me your name.
Linda Conley.
Linda Conley, thanks so much for that message, and thanks for the information you communicated to my office. Now, I have used that in speech after speech. I've used that in some media interviews. Not sure whether I've used it on Fox specifically, but now that you asked me to, Linda, I'll figure out ways to include it in more. Look, you're exactly right. We cannot become a debtor nation. Unfortunately, we already are that. But sometimes you can't fix stupid things you've already done, but you can at least stop digging the hole, right?
Yeah.
So we can still get out of this, I think, but only if we stop right now. When I was about 14 years old, I was out, oh, thank you very much. When I was about 14 years old, we were out doing errands with a family one evening, and we went over to the church, tithing settlement. My dad said, hey, let's go out for ice cream after that. I had homework, so I said, no, you dropped me off at home, I've got to go do my homework. So I got out of the car. It's a big car, 7 kids in the family. The car was heavy on its own with 7 kids in it, it's even heavier. I stepped out of the car. My dad, good man, but was kind of an absent-minded guy sometimes. He started driving off while I was still in the car. And my left foot was underneath the car, packed full of 7 kids, well, 6 without me. And it was bent backwards like this. I was out of breath. I could hardly speak because big car on your foot hurts. And so I realized I could only get out one word. And I just said, Dad, reverse. That was the only thing that came to mind. He got the message. He put the car in reverse and he got the car off of my foot. Sometimes that's what you have to do. If you can't do anything else, you just got to stay reverse. We do have to reverse course because we can't do this. Let me tell you a few of the reasons why. Number one, if we continue to spend at this pace, we're just printing more money. In the U.S. economy, there's a basket of goods. Only so many goods the U.S. economy can produce in a given year. And if you just add more and more money to it by printing it off, what's going to happen to the price of everything? It's going to go up. If you're rich, you figure out a way to make even more money off of that. If you're everyone else, you're in trouble. Because everyone else lives, on a fixed budget, often paycheck to paycheck. And so what that does is it robs from the poor to give to the rich, so a handful of politicians can get pats on the back. Shame on them, and shame on us for electing them when they do that. That's problem number one. Problem number two, this is one of the things that keeps me up late at night. It scares me to death. I've been worried about this. I've been worrying about this for 10 years. You know what we spent last year on interest on our national debt? It's about $350 billion. Now, $350 billion is a lot of money. There are people right here in the UNF Basin who don't earn $350 billion in a whole year. Who's happy for that? That's not the scary part. The scary part is that it's only $350 billion. It's about the same as our interest payment 20 years ago when our national debt was what? Maybe an eighth the size of what it is now? How does that happen? Well, our treasury yield rates, the rate at which we have to repay those who buy U.S. Treasury bonds, is at an all-time historic low. Partly because of the way we've been able to manipulate it, partly because it's the least bad bet of its kind anywhere in the world. But that sort of thing doesn't work forever. What goes down must eventually come back up. The minute our treasury yield rates return back just to their historic average, even assuming there's no rebound above that, you know what happens? We go from spending about $350 billion a year to over $1 trillion a year just in interest on the national debt. The difference between what we're paying then and what we'll be paying, what we're paying now and what we'll be paying then, more than our entire defense budget. There's not a tax increase imaginable that could produce that much revenue. And if we tried, it would devastate the economy and hurt the poor and middle class even more. So you can't just tax your way out of it. You could print more money, but that hurts the poor and middle class even more. Or you could have massive or draconian spending cuts, the likes of which would cause riots and looting in the streets. It would ultimately hurt the poor. The only other way out of it is to stop now. When you fall from a 10-story building, it is not the fall that will kill you. It is the abrupt halt at the end. But if you have something to break the fall, a big trampoline, airbag, or a parachute, or a bungee cord, that helps. We've got to stop it. And we've got to figure out a way to break the fall. But to do that, we've got to reverse course. So to that end, one of the first things I did when I got to the Senate 10 years ago, I drafted my own balanced budget amendment because I looked through all the balanced budget amendment proposals out there. We need an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that restricts Congress's ability to spend more than it takes in a year, or more than 18% of GDP, or to raise the debt ceiling, or to raise taxes. If you have those four things in combination, then politicians can no longer use the poor middle class as a springboard, creating this reverse Robin Hood effect where you steal from the poor to take from to give to the rich. It would require a supermajority in both houses of Congress to do either of those things anytime you want to do them. That has to be the answer. In the meantime, the other part of the answer is we need more people willing to vote for senators and congressmen who are willing to just say no. Willing to say, heck no. I'm from Provo, and where I come from, heck no is very strong language. Look forward to learning those words. By the way, I try to collect words from every language. For some reason, the words I remember have been bad. Still remember a youth term that Jay Jordanson taught me. Lupe Maracach. He told me that crazy white guy I met with the youth tribal council earlier today. They told me it was true. Next question.
I'm going to give you a little background, and then I'll ask my two requests. I'll ask. First off, I'm Catherine Larson, and I'm from Bridgeland, which is 20 miles from here. Come in 2022, I will have been voting for 50 years in different states, and I was always taught by my family, you research all of the issues and all the candidates, and then you go and vote your voice. And so that's what I hope everybody does, that they do good research. Duchesne County is almost 3,300 square miles. It was very difficult for the commissioners to make sure all of the areas were covered for voting. And so they decided to make Duchesne County a mail in-ballot voting process. And it has been very successful. We have increased our participation in voting. We aren't 80 or 90 or 100% yet. And other rural counties liked it, and they went the same way. And eventually the state went that way, with the mail-in ballot was a good way to go. And you can either mail your ballot, you can use it, a ballot box, or you can drop it at the county office, or you can vote at the county office. A few years into that, they did make an error, and they requested we put a stamp on the ballot. And I protested. I called the county and I called the state. And eventually it was agreed that as a poll tax. You have to pay to vote. That's a poll tax. And so that has been taken off. Hopefully they'll stop using old envelopes, but we are not required to pay for our vote. But I didn't have to go to court. I didn't have to go to the Supreme Court. I called, and we got issues resolved. And that's what it should be. And people worry about mail-in balloting. For Utah, should be able to brag because not only did they not lose votes, they gained another congressperson. All of our representatives to the House and to the Senate are Republicans, so they didn't lose anything, they gained anything. So first request, can you go back to your colleagues in the Senate and in the House and brag about Duchesne County, the first county to say, no, we're going to do mail-in ballot, and brag about Utah. Utah did not lose their reputation as being a Republican state. It is still a Republican state. Mail-in balloting works. And my next request is, could you please take your bragging rights and then vote for both voting bills to come up so that voting is open to any and all in a fair, open, and accessible way. Those are my requests.
Thank you. Thanks, Patsy. It is Patsy, right?
Patsy.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
That part of it, you're right, Kathy. Thank you for sharing that. On your first request, yeah, I can do that. And I like you, by the way. This is somebody who reads the Constitution and figures out ways to apply it. We looked at that and said, poll tax. I don't think anybody intended to violate that when they did that. That's sometimes what it takes. It's just a citizen saying, hey, technically speaking, people are going to have to expend costs. We don't want a poll tax. That's fantastic. It also speaks well to local government. And by the way, I have to say here, love your county commissioners. I love your state legislators. You've got some of the very best elected officials in the entire state right here. And that speaks well to them that they respond to that. So I'm happy to share that story with my colleagues in Washington. I do believe mail-in balloting can be done properly. As long as you take steps to make sure that it's secure, it can be done properly. And I think we here in Utah and you in Duchesne County have shown that can be done. Now, when you say vote for both voting bills, tell me what you mean by that. Are you referring to HR 1 and HR 5? HR 1 and HR 4, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and HR 1. Kathy, on that one, I can agree to your first request. Your second request, I can't vote for those bills. I can't vote for either one of them. The Constitution is very, very careful about elections. It makes certain things very, very clear. With very few exceptions, we are not in charge in Washington of elections. We're in charge of very, very little when it comes to that. That's up to states and localities. It is that way. It must always be that way because bad things happen with the dangerous accumulation of power in the hands of a few. And what guarantees our status as a republic is local self-rule. I can't vote for those because they dangerously undercut it. They are independently constitutional in about 10 ways, each one of those bills. I will not vote for them. If somehow they are enacted, they will be stricken down because they are very, very unconstitutional. I wish we could agree on that one. On this one, we don't.
Our county is a quilted county, and we're coming up for redistricting again here. We have, in this one county, we have 3 different state representatives, and then of course with our Senate representatives. Our one county is quilted. We need, when they come in to redistrict our representatives, they need to be, again, open and fair and available that, we don't have a quilted county. It's unfair to us, and it should not have been done. And so we can stop being a quilted county. I would request.
Understood. And then that's any argument like that is a very appropriate argument to make, and it must be made with the state legislature. That's where the power resides, not the Congress. And trust me, if you don't want it, go to Congress. Yes, you have a voice, but your voice is in Salt Lake City. It's not in Washington, D.C. When you send it to Washington, D.C., it gets diluted, and bad things happen when it goes to Washington, D.C. if it doesn't belong there. This one doesn't.
My name's Tim Trujillo, and I think a lot like many people here, I'm mad, I'm pissed, I'm frustrated, because yes, mainstream media manipulates everything, and we don't get the truth. We hear all kinds of rumors out there, like one I heard today, that the government is paying farmers 1.5 times more for their crops to not farm and raise it. And if they and then they need to destroy what they have, or they will be taxed greatly. So they're shrinking our food supplies. They're throwing away crude oil, not anywhere in particular other than throwing it back in the ground. These types of things, especially for here in the basin where crude oil is our lifeline, farming is our lifeline, I don't know how else to explain it other than I am pissed.
Jim, you should be. You have every right to be. This is the natural, foreseeable consequence of too much power going to Washington. Let me ask you a question. What part of the Constitution gives Congress the power to get involved in farming anyway? Can anyone tell me that? It's not there. You can search it high and low. I spent my entire life with that document. I don't call myself a constitutional expert. I'm just a guy with a copy of the Constitution I read it. I cannot find any part of it that gives them the authority to do that. Nor can I find any authority in there for them to pay some farmers time and a half based on their race. My history books, the ones that I've studied my entire life, tell me that bad things happen when a government treats you differently based on the color of your skin. I believe in the dream of Martin Luther King. We'll reach the day, and we should all aspire to achieve the moment when a man will be judged on the basis of the character of his heart and not the color of his skin. We fought a war to guarantee racial equality and to guarantee that our government would never treat people differently based on their skin color. We won that war. We amended the Constitution to say specifically that. We can't turn back on it now. Nor is there any reason that I can see why the federal government would want to make the United States of America, dependent on foreign oil. You see what's happening right now? President Biden is going to OPEC. Countries that hate us, countries that tend to use our petrodollars to fund acts of terrorism against us, asking them on bended knee with cap in hand, please produce more oil so that the American people don't have to pay so much for gasoline. Because I, President Biden, have imposed an oil and gas leasing moratorium. And I, President Biden, have shut down the Keystone XL pipeline. And I, President Biden, am engaging in all sorts of threats against the fossil fuels industry, of the sort that will end up impoverishing poor and middle class Americans. So yeah, Jimmy Kennedy rightly pissed. I'm pissed too.
Senator Lee, first, thank you for coming. I'm not actually from here. I'm one of the millions who live in the city. No, I did not bring my politics. I ran from them. Yeah, so it's good to see you, and my contacts and friends around the world, when they see you on social media, say, do you really live there? That's really cool. We like you. So there's a lot of people who admire and respect you. And so thank you. Now I'd like to get quickly to my concern. And I know that there'll probably have to be a conversation with some of your staff afterwards. There's a lot of things that I can get upset about, but there's one that is alarming to me right now, and that is, dovetailing with his observation, a lot of censorship in media, and specifically on issues regarding medical sciences. I am one of those people who had COVID. I am recovered from COVID. I had a second bout of it, and I got over it really easily. I have not had a flu shot in a quarter century, and it's contraindicated because the last time I had it, I got sick. And I am reading science that says two things. Number one, antibodies may be more resistant to strains of COVID than these mRNA vaccines are. I don't know about the Johnson one. I know the difference in the science. And the second one is, for the recovered, especially men, getting that vaccine, at least the mRNA ones, is a threat to our health. And I personally know several people, each time they've gotten one and they're afraid of the booster, things get worse. So my question is, for those of us who are antibody, is there any room for us to be free to go about our lives without having a needle forced in us that may jeopardize our health?
No one should have to go to their government for permission to be free. Freedom's a birthright. It's not something that you have to ask from the government. Nowhere is your freedom more directly impacted than when the government tells you something that you have to take into your body. Now look, I got the vaccine. I had COVID and I got it. It was my decision. I made it in consultation with my doctors. Maybe years down the road I'll turn out to be right, maybe wrong, I don't know. I got it. It was my decision. Nobody made me. I'll be damned if we're ever going to let the government tell people they've got to get it.
Can I ask you, was it the mRNA or was it the Johnson, if you don't mind sharing?
What's that?
Was it one of the mRNAs or was it the Johnson?
It was Pfizer.
Pfizer, thank you.
In the case of, most people who had already had the virus, like me, react more to the first shot than the second shot. If you haven't had it, tends to be the second shot that you react to more. I felt like crap after the first shot. Didn't really notice the second one, or for a day or two.
But that hasn't been universally true.
Yeah.
And if we had more accurate information, I think we would be able to make these decisions. I'm not anti-vax. I've had typhoid. I'm up to date on my tetanus. Most people can't say that. But I'm really concerned about mRNA technology. Anyway, getting back to the question, where is the room for us to have the freedom to make that our own choice without being singled out and isolated as
Right.
the pariahs of society?
Right, and look, if you've got family or friends who want to encourage you to get it, that's fine, that's their business. If you've got somebody who wants to not do business with somebody who's not vaccinated, very, very foolish on their part. That's why I don't think most people who do business would want to do that. But never, ever, ever do you want to trust government to do that, because what is government? Government is not a God. It doesn't have eyes to see you. It doesn't have arms with which to embrace you. It doesn't have a heart with which to love you. It's neither omniscient nor omnipotent. It doesn't have the ability to do any of those things. Government is one thing and one thing only. It's force. You don't want to use force except where absolutely necessary. For people who love government action, I like to ask them the question. You want to do X, Y, or Z. Is it worth using violence? Why do you want to use violence? Anytime you want to use government to do something, you've got to be able to answer the question. Is it worth using violence? And I don't think forcing people to take a vaccine they don't want is worth using violence.
I just wanted to take this is an affidavit from a whistleblower regarding election integrity. I personally think that Joe Biden is an illegitimate president, so I really appreciate it.
Right. Yeah, I'm happy to review it. Tell me your name.
Tori Queen.
Tori. Thank you. Yeah, I'll take a look at it. Elections happen. Sometimes they result in disputes. And one of the things that makes them tough is that there's a very short time period between when an election happens and when somebody takes office. Like our conversation a minute ago, Kathy was telling us a little bit about the poll tax and things like that. We always have to point back to the Constitution when we're looking at elections. Every state has a responsibility to conduct elections, and in particular with presidential elections. The Founding Fathers were very precise on this point, even more precise than in almost any other area. The Founding Fathers wanted to make darn sure that the states were in charge of choosing the president. It's all governed by Article 2, Section 1, and the 12th Amendment. And what they say is that the states choose electors. Those electors then choose the president. It's interesting. I had forgotten this for a while. I hadn't looked at it a lot until last fall. I hadn't looked at it in about 20 years, and I remembered something. The Constitution doesn't actually require the states to hold presidential elections. We do have them. Every state does have them. They're not required to by the Constitution. That's our history, that's our tradition. There were several states that, for several presidential election cycles early in the history of our republic, didn't even hold elections. The legislature just chose their electors. They're entitled to do that. They're entitled to hold elections by whatever means they deem appropriate, or not hold them at all. That's why the role of the federal government is very narrow and very limited. Anyway, I'm grateful for the affidavit. I'll take a look at it.
So interesting.
Thank you. Sir.
Yeah, my name is James Costello. There's two things. One of you are talking about not forcing the vaccination, but we are as a nation. We're starting in September that every one of our service members will be required to be vaccinated. Last I know, they're Americans. And their rights are being violated and enforced. So let's say there is a negative thing. We are going to be putting a negative thing. Let's say it's unhealthy to do in the long term, let's say 4 or 5 years down the road. And we lose our services left and right from something that's unhealthy. Now we don't even have something to defend ourselves. The second thing, I've done lots of deployments. And every deployment we do, my dad did too. You go ahead and deploy, you take equipment. When you leave, you take equipment. To leave those helicopters was there, there's not a pilot they get on a bus and come home. No, that is a planned strategy. That's the only thing that could have been. 17 years, I've got 11 friends that are here.
Which branch do you serve?
Yeah, special operations. So I know that there's no way any of these guys, gurus like me that are out there, just walked away. You know, they were commanded and told to get on the bus. So that, I'm glad you said you're going to investigate, because there's corruption there, and there's treason that's there. They didn't leave pallets full of cash on the target. They left all the equipment instead. They didn't have to leave billions of dollars sitting on pallets. They left billions of dollars in equipment, which they would rather have had. That's treason to give equipment to fight against it.
Thank you. Thank you, by the way, for your service. Appreciate the willingness to serve our country, and appreciate the willingness to share that with us. Yeah, he's absolutely right. Do not leave that stuff on the battlefield. You don't leave it because you know what you do, somebody else is going to use it. They're going to use it against us, or they're going to use it against other people who are aligned with us, or they're going to sell it and make a profit off of it, and usually use the profit to harm us or our allies. You don't ever do that. You're right, they are doing that with the military. It is a little bit different. Doesn't mean it's a good idea. I wish they wouldn't do it. If they're going to do it, they at least ought to give people the ability to seek an objection, an exemption based either on a religious objection or a medical objection or something like that. There are very few medical treatments of which I'm aware that don't have the potential to create adverse reactions in some people. And why you want to mandate something? How many people serve in the armed forces? It's a lot. I mean, we're looking at an enormous volume of people. The odds that all of those people that none of those people will have an adverse reaction, and that some of those people who will have an adverse reaction won't have reason to know in advance. Very slim. And so if you're going to create the obligation, you've got to give them an out. That is a little bit different than imposing the obligation on all people. At least there it's tied to their employment. That's a full comfort to those who are already employed by the Army or the Navy or the Air Force or the Marines. And last I checked, it's not a very nice way to treat people who are ready to lay down their lives in service of their country. I asked Joe Biden, leave them alone. Don't make them do that. You've already subjected some of them to being killed unnecessarily. Don't make them get a vaccine they don't want to get. Salt Lake City, which is a fairly big city. I believe that there are others, but Salt Lake is the biggest and the most well-known among them. And sanctuary cities, of course, we're referring to cities that refuse up front to communicate information that they have about people taken into custody by them on criminal charges about their illegal status in the United States. This is a troubling trend because we do live in a nation of laws, and there's always been kind of an understanding between states and localities and the federal government that states and localities won't aid, abet, or facilitate unlawful acts. It is, in fact, an unlawful act to be in the United States unlawfully. So, look, it's one thing for a state or a locality to say we want to use our resources carefully and we're not going to have people out on patrol for it. That's fine. That's not what we're talking about. It's quite another thing for them to say at the outset, even when we become aware of it, we're not going to tell them. We will not help you in any way become aware of persons who have no business in the United States. It's lawless. And unfortunately, most of the jurisdictions that do that are receiving federal funds. So it's one of the reasons why I've supported legislation that would deprive them of federal funds when they do that. By the way, I think we shouldn't be giving them federal funds to begin with. It doesn't make any sense for us to take money from you, send it back to Washington, and then send it back to a law enforcement agency, especially when a lot of those law enforcement agencies aren't even going to use it to help us deter crime.
I'm Stephen Gold from Ballard, which is right next to Roosevelt.
What's your first name?
Stephen.
Steve. Thank
Call me
you.
Steve or Mike or something. Anyways, I'm going to hit back on a couple of points that were made. One thing that was thrown around was the word treason. I believe there's a lot of treason being implemented upon this country by people in D.C. and one, of course, is especially the resident in charge, Joe Biden, and also Pelosi, and a few others, probably Schumer. And I believe that this treason should be treated as such and action should be taken because a lot of the things that these people do in decision making is completely against the people of this country and is for other entities. They seem to never make the right choice from what I hear. I listen to Glenn Beck, I listen to KBDL. That's a good source of information for me. I'm conservative. I'm not really a Republican, but I'm conservative. I vote Republicans. That's really the only choice I have to be a conservative. The other thing I want to get at is because of this big push to take these unproven drugs and the deliberate attempt to push away ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, why isn't something being done about that to let us make our choice and not hide the fact that those are really proven drugs and they're very safe at work? I had COVID at the end of 2019. I beat it myself. It was terrible. My lungs were severely affected, but I had a certain remedy I do, and it worked. There's nothing you can't get at the store, but it works. But I'm really concerned that those two items, hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, are pushed to be withheld from the public, when prior to this, they were commonly available. So there's a couple of points, those and the treason factor.
Okay, let's address both of those. First is the treason point. Treason, by the way, is the only crime identified in the Constitution as a federal crime. Consists of giving aid and comfort to our enemies, knowingly, intentionally. It's got to be proven by multiple witnesses. Tough to prove, but where proven, carries serious penalties. Let me put it this way. I can't state, I used to be a prosecutor, I can't state in the abstract whether somebody has committed a particular crime without reviewing all the evidence. One doesn't have to even go that far, though, to be troubled by what happened here. I don't know whether we committed treason. What I do know is that 13 Americans are dead today because of a boneheaded move that he pulled that was completely unnecessary. I don't know how we got here. I don't know why he did that, but something's not right. He messed up, and he messed up badly. And this one is not, look, there are plenty of issues on which Republicans and Democrats on which Republicans and Democrats disagree constantly, continuously, not out of a desire to engage in partisan bickering just for the sake thereof, but because of genuine philosophical differences. This one isn't one of them. There are a lot of disagreements I have with Joe Biden that are partisan in nature. This one's not partisan. This is as bipartisan a reason as can exist. What he did in connection with the way he got us out of Afghanistan, not that he did, but the way he did it makes no sense. I have no idea who's captaining that ship, but whoever is, and it's supposed to be him, has gone dangerously astray. I don't know what happened, but I'm going to find out in the coming weeks, and there will be ramifications. Yes, sir.
I don't think I mentioned it, but part of this treason deal is allowing people to invade our country from open borders.
Oh, that, okay. All right. Gotcha.
He opened the border when it was secure.
Right. He opened it when it was secure. You know, something interesting. COVID was a disaster. Two aspects of COVID that were really disasters. You got the illness itself, not fun, not pleasant. I had it. Fortunately, I recovered. Some people weren't so lucky. Then you have the other component of COVID, the government response to COVID. That was also horrible. One interesting thing that happened along the way, there were a few, I don't know if you can call them bright sides because there's so much of COVID that was bad. One of the few upshots of COVID was, as a result of that, we tightened border security during that time period. And for the first time in quite a while, illegal border crossings by land ground to basically an abrupt halt. That was still the status quo when Joe Biden took office. He managed to reverse that, and he did so deliberately. That's awful.
That is treasonous.
It is, you have to think through whether that meets the constitutional definition of treason.
Who carries the disease over the border?
What's that?
Who carries COVID over the border?
Right. Not just COVID, but lots of other infectious diseases as well, including a whole lot of infectious diseases we've largely conquered in this country over time. And that's very difficult. It's cost us a lot of money. It's cost us a lot of research. It's cost us a lot of effort. You can undo a lot of that good when you allow uncontrolled waves of illegal immigration. One of the things that I hate the most about that is those preachy, progressive elites on the East Coast who claim this is how we show how woke we are, how tolerant we are. This is something many of them say that Hispanic Americans want. It's one of the most racist claims that I've ever heard, and it's utterly absurd. Okay, I spent 2 years living along the Texas-Mexico border, living and working among people, mostly didn't speak my native tongue, mostly spoke Spanish. Among people, many of whom were recent immigrants to this country, some legally, others illegally. You know what recent immigrants to this country fear most? They fear uncontrolled waves of illegal immigration because they're the people who are on the front lines. They're the people whose jobs, whose neighborhoods, whose schools, whose communities, whose health, whose livelihoods are most put at stake, at risk. So, yeah, you're right to be very concerned on that. On hydroxychloroquine and other treatments, I always thought it was strange that there was such a decided effort to resist not only those drugs, but basically all other treatments for COVID. They didn't want to treat the symptoms. Why? We treat all sorts of stuff. Why were they so resistant to do that?
There's very little money in it. Right, if you're pharmacy, you're making money on it.
They were off patent.
Pharmacy is making big money on it.
Yeah. Why, by the way, do we have this huge federal structure? It tells us what to do. It tells us we've got to wear masks on every bus, on every airplane, every train station, in any federal building. Why do we have all those people telling us what to do? When at almost every stage, some of those same people have been leading us astray and told us the wrong thing about the virus, often with disastrous consequences. This, yet again, is yet another example of why you shouldn't trust too much government to Washington. It's why the Founding Fathers didn't trust too much government in Washington. It's why the Founding Fathers said most powers of government are going to be left to the states or to the people. Only a few things: national defense, weights and measures, trademarks, copyrights, and patents, immigration and naturalization laws, laws regulating trade and commerce between the states with foreign nations and with the Indian tribes. Patents, letters of marque and reprisal, declaring war. That's about it. There are a few others, but that's more or less it in a nutshell. Most things that the federal government does today probably shouldn't be in Washington. They should be here with the people.
I'm Alan Cooper. I was born in 42, so I'm 78 years old. And not only am I a veteran of the Vietnam era, but I'm also a oil field worker. And I've done everything that I could do in between the booms and the busts. And I've actually drilled here, as well as the North Slope of Alaska, as well as one in Pakistan, when they're short short-handed over there, they're short-handed. And so that's how I ended up over there, so I'm a lake of that 80 miles an hour. That's how they greet each other. And I'm telling you right now that I was blessed with a dad that was born in 1910 and a grandmother that was born in 1882. I'll tell you right now, they didn't have vaccines in the 1880s. And so as a result, boy, when one came up like a typhoid booster, we got it. And polio hadn't even been found a problem for it. And so as a result, many of my classmates and my aunt and uncle had polio. Now I'm going to say this much. Most of what you said, I amen. Okay? But the point that I make more than anything else in the world is, why don't they vet these doggone politicians? And the ship's behind, and you let it sink before. Why didn't they just drop some kind? They should have had all of those arms wired and blown up. I don't know what our military has come to, but it's probably the generals and as well as the politicians. There's two things that settle war. One is politics and the other one is the military. I salute that flag, and I'm showing this flag wing, son of a gun. We did it all the time in the Navy.
Thank you for your service. Boys, we could install you as President of the United States. None of this would have happened. There'd be no nonsense. You'd be a good president. Vetting politicians. It happens. We call them elections. Elections is the process by which we vet politicians. Fortunately, politicians can only serve a set number of years before they're up for election again. I'm guessing Mr. Biden has seen his last election. He's never, ever going to be electable to anything, not dog catcher, and certainly not President of the United States again. As you point about scuttling the ship, yeah, you're totally right. And that was the plan all along. I reviewed the plans. I received classified briefings on how this was going to happen. It was always going to involve shipping back the weapons we could ship back and destroying everything else. Every barrel destroyed, every firing pin removed. Certainly no tanks, no helicopters, no airplanes, no armored vehicles left behind. With some of our most sophisticated technology that could be used against us and against our allies.
My name is Dennis Ingram. I moved here in '72 with Parker Building Company, and have worked in the oil field till I retired 2 years ago. The last 27 years I worked for the Department of Natural Resources, coal, gas, and mining. I was an inspector here in Michigan County. So I spent all my adult life involved here, and I am a Republican, conservative, and followed that path my whole life. The election was pretty crushing because many of us thought it was stolen. And so I have followed that since I'm retired. It's one of the things I do. Some of my spare time is following the election audits. And I've been watching the Arizona audit. I hope you have it. But, they came out with a meeting a couple weeks ago. They called Karen Fann called a meeting with the Maricopa County Board of Elections and made them show up to ask them questions about 107,000 anomalies, which means votes that probably shouldn't be counted. Because we know Trump lost like 10,000 in Arizona. And, you know, the Maricopa County Board only delivered half the machines they asked for. They didn't deliver any of them envelopes, signatures on them. There's half of the data was not turned over to the audit staff. But anyway, they'd already come up with 107,000 anomalies that had not been explained away. So, of course, as the audit progressed, they've gone through this kinematic artifacts where they look for faults and look at the paper. And they'll be coming out probably next week, she will, with a press conference. And some of the people who's following that, but both says that that's going to be much worse than 107,000. I don't know if you're going to call them illegal votes or anomalies, but that's what they are. And there's 78,000 more votes came in than were mailed out. That was 78,000 of 107,000 anomalies. So anyway, there could be 200,000 to 300,000 votes that are illegal in Arizona when Trump lost by 10,000. So it's very possible that the Senate and Congress might go down their electoral votes in the presidential election of 2020. And the Republican in Pennsylvania has announced this last week that he's going to order a full forensic audit and send out the subpoenas for that information. So it's very possible that the first domino will drop next week or the week after for Arizona. And then hopefully they'll go forward and rescind their electoral votes to the president. And according to Rudy Giuliani, there's 600,000 to 700,000 illegal votes in Pennsylvania. And I think Trump lost like 38,000. So if that's pulled also, if they do have a full forensic audit, and if they do show hundreds of thousands of illegal votes, which they most likely will, and then they pull their electoral votes in the second column of the votes, and then Wisconsin or Michigan does theirs, and then all of a sudden Biden does not have electoral votes. So at that point, if it comes to that, what happens then?
If it comes to that, it'd be catastrophic for our system in the sense that the Democratic Party must never be allowed to hold power again, and I think voters would make sure of it. What you're asking is whether the outcome of the presidential election and the current occupant of the Oval Office would change as a result of that. The answer under the Constitution is unequivocally no. The election becomes final after a couple of things happen. December 16th, that's when the Electoral College votes were cast. Those were cast, there were not dueling slates from any of the states. Each state cast exactly one set of ballots. Those were reviewed. They were opened on January 6th. Under Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the Constitution, in the 12th Amendment, Congress has only one job: open and count. Open and count. That's all it can do. Unless there are dueling slates from any state, of which there were none in this case, Congress performs only a ministerial function. It doesn't have any discretion as to count those. There's no mechanism by which to undo the outcome of a presidential election after that has transpired and we've inaugurated a president. So, look, if what you're describing can in fact be proven, and I think we can be fairly confident that Democrats will lose power in congressional elections in 22 and in the next presidential election in 2024. Maybe if we were starting the Constitutional Convention from scratch, someone would revisit this and identify some other way of changing the outcome of the election after that. That's not what we have. We have to operate with the Constitution that we have, rather than the one that might have been.
Does the fraud cancel all?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And this is key. This is very important because what sometimes may appear to work against us and work in our favor when we stick to it because of the document. Fraud does not cancel all. A state is constitutionally empowered under the Constitution to have a lame-ass election. A not well-conducted election. They are constitutionally entitled to do that if they want. Now, it's stupid. It's probably their political humor if it's discovered. But they are entitled to botch their election. They're entitled even to allow fraud. Now, it's horrible. They should never do it. But if they do it, it is their choice, and we're stuck with the consequences once the electoral votes are cast.
Yeah, well, I thought this was live, the swing states all said electoral vote, Republican, Democrat.
Not a single one.
They did the president, they still didn't count.
Not a single one. Not a single state sent dueling slates. Now, this has happened at times in our history. The 1876 election between Hayes and Tilden. There were 4 states that sent dueling slates. In 1960, there was at least one, the state of Hawaii, sent 2 slates. Congress in that circumstance had to ascertain which slates were legitimate and to pick between the 2 of them. When that happens, and at the time we open the ballots, we have some discretion not discretion, but we have an obligation to figure out which slate is legitimate. In the absence of dueling slates, we don't have any discretion at all. Our job is to open and count, and that's all there is.
What hope do we have to stop Biden? Other than 2024, what hope do we have?
Well,
He's ruining this country.
I've taken a number of steps that I believe are contributing to the demise of the United States and of good policy. I wish he could say he's the only president in U.S. history who's done that. I wish I could say there's no Congress or other president of the United States that's also done bad things and taken us in a dangerous direction. The sad thing is this: over the last 85 years, White Houses, Houses of Representatives, and Senates of every conceivable partisan combination have been taking us away steadily and surely from the Constitution. They have ignored the limited enumerated powers. They've gone from a Constitution that James Madison described as giving powers to Congress few and defined and reserving powers to the states that are numerous and indefinite. They've crisscrossed those, and with the help of the education establishment, the news media establishment, the entertainment media establishment, they've asked the American people to forget, to obliterate, to write out of history, as it were, these ideas of federalism and of separation of powers. These twin structural protections that are themselves the ultimate backstop against all other constitutional intrusions. The Bill of Rights, as the late Justice Anthony Scalia used to say, any tin-horn dictator around the world can have a glowing Bill of Rights. In fact, most dictators do. What makes the difference between a Bill of Rights that's not worth any more than the paper it's printed on and one that actually works? Well, it's structural protections to protect the people against the dangerous accumulation of power in the hands of the few. Our Constitution does this on 2 levels. There's one vertical protection, we call that federalism. That's the one that says most of the powers at the state level. The other one is horizontal. It says within the federal government, we're going to have 3 branches. The executive branch, headed by the president, in charge of enforcing the laws. Legislative branch, headed by Congress, in charge of making the laws. The judicial branch, headed by the Supreme Court, in charge of interpreting the laws. We stuck to that framework pretty rigidly for 150 years, and it worked. It created the greatest civilization the world has ever known. We're great as Americans not because of who we are, but because of what we do, the choices that we've made. Particularly the choice we made to stick with that document for 150 years. We've had a nice, bad, long deviation from that constitutional norm. Look, Winston Churchill said something about the American people that was insightful. He's not American, but his mother was. Sometimes somebody from the outside can see us better than we see ourselves. He said the American people can always be counted on to do the right thing after they've exhausted every other alternative. We've given this progressive government thing a long, hard try. It's resulted in tears and bloodshed. It's time to stop. It's time to turn back the page on the Constitution, to turn it back to where we're following it, to where we're reading it, to where we're demanding it of federal officials when they run for office. You wouldn't believe how many people, I don't know why it happens, because people come to me, they're running for the U.S. Senate or the U.S. House of Representatives, or sometimes even president of this state or that state. They come seeking my endorsement. I subject them to an interview. Sometimes they regret that afterwards. They talk to me for a long time. I asked them a number of questions. But first and foremost, I want to know what they believe about federalism and separation of powers. I want to know in particular what they believe about Congress's power under the Commerce Clause and under the Spending Clause. That's where most of the mischief has happened. That's where we've destroyed federalism. Once we destroyed federalism, we started to destroy separation of powers. If you'll help me with this, we can turn it back. I don't think it's too late yet. It's almost too late, but it's not too late yet. It's still there, but we've got to have people who will vote according to the Constitution and according to whether somebody's actually ever read it. Most of these guys have.
So what happened to Joe Manchin and Fiscal? Do they support what you just said? Because we're lost if they don't support the Constitution.
Yeah, we are. I believe that they both believe that they're supporting the Constitution. I don't believe that very many members of Congress, just to be frank, in either party are as vigilant as they should be about guarding against federal intrusion. And it would be, it'd surprise you how many times I ask these candidates when they come through, what do you think about the Commerce Clause? And they look at me like deer in the headlights. And then they'll offer an answer that's even worse than the deer in the headlights. And they'll say, well, whatever the Supreme Court says we can do. There's a big difference between what the court says Congress can get away with and actually complying with the Constitution.
Folks, the hour has come to an end. I apologize, I'll do the back nine. For those of you who have questions still and didn't have an opportunity to ask them of the Senator, there are two options available to you right now. Most of you have a copy of the Senator's annual report. Inside the front cover, there are phone numbers. You call one of those, depending on where you live, someone's going to answer that. Alternatively, here tonight, myself, a number of other staff members are here. If you don't put your hands up, staff members you can see in the rear of the room where we are. Feel free to hang around for a bit afterwards. And with that, I'll thank you all for being here. And of course, thank you, Senator Lee, for being here.
A couple of closing remarks. I want to thank you for coming. Could have done a lot of things on this beautiful Thursday evening. I'm grateful you came here to be with me. I still believe in my heart of hearts our best days are ahead of us. As I've been traveling the state this week and over the last few months, crisscross the state from one end to the other, I'm going to keep going, and hear from people, hear what their concerns are. I continue to hear hope, and I continue to see optimism in their eyes. They believe in something that's bigger than all of us. It's better than government. And they believe that we're better to work together and not under the coercive force of government micromanaging our every decision. We're good as a country not because of who we are inherently, but because of what we do. And we can be better again if we make better choices. I don't want to be a Johnny One Note, but sometimes one has to be. It's about the Constitution. I personally believe that that thing was written by wise men who were raised up by Almighty God to that very purpose. This is not just another country. If freedom can't exist, if it can't survive, and it can't thrive here, where can it? If not us, who? And if not now, when? We've all got a responsibility to defend it. It's not worth more than the paper it's printed on unless we read it and digest it and internalize it and make it part of every political conversation we ever have. So talk to your friends, neighbors, your family members, your crazy uncles at Thanksgiving dinner, especially that. We need that. Talk to them about what you think. Not about what I think, but about you, what you think. Read the Constitution. If you don't want to read the whole thing, just read Article 1, Section 8. That's the part of the Constitution that gives Congress its power. It's basically what delineates between federal power and state power. If it's not an Article 1, Section 8, you've got it. If it's not an Article 1, Section 8, then there's a good chance Congress doesn't have the power to do it. Read it. Thanks so much. Read it. And decide for yourself what you think it means. It's really important that, I love the fact that we've got Article 1, Section 1 highlighted. He and I are old friends, and he knows how I think, and good man. Very first operative provision, very first clause, very first section, very first article of the Constitution says that all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in the Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. This is no mere coincidence. Power to legislate is the power to destroy. It's the most dangerous branch. It's It's no coincidence that they gave it to the most, the branch of government most accountable to the people at the most regular intervals. And it's no coincidence that they didn't include in there any power to make laws for unelected, unaccountable federal bureaucrats. It's also no coincidence that they didn't give any power in there to give unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats the power to control 2/3 of the landmass in any one state. This is reprehensible to our form of government. We can do better. So it's time, my fellow friends, Americans and Utahns, it's time for us not to settle. Don't settle for multi-trillion-dollar deficits. Expect balanced budgets. Don't settle for federal overreach. Expect respect for federalism. It's time to expect more, and it's time to expect freedom. Thank you very much.